So just as a clarification, this is my second conversation with them, and I'm hoping that it will be different. And there will be certain themes that will be repeated. And I want to, you started saying, poverty for, poor economics for children, and how personal stories are essentially at the heart of this. And I really want Esther to start off with telling the story as to why the stereotypes that existed, that she had about poor people. She was very young, and the kind of books that she read, and that inspired her to do this.
So for people who were there this morning, that's going to be a repeat, right? That's what we're talking about, because the story hasn't changed since.
As it is. But I think, so let me put it this, sorry? Oh, they're all new listeners? So yes, but I think it's important anyway to repeat the story.
So apologies if it's a repeat, but it is in fact a pertinent story, maybe a story for the genesis of this book. So my mom is a doctor, and she was spending a lot of time working with kids victims of war all over the world. So she was traveling and coming back and showing us slideshows. At the time, those were these little squares of slideshows for travels, and telling us this is your contribution to helping those kids who live in this difficult situation is to let me go. And I thought, well, that's okay. That's not a kind of a huge contribution. And so I was kind of aware from a very young age of the huge chance, sheer luck that got me to be born where I was born. And I had under the somewhat grandiose impression that it gave me a cosmic responsibility to do something about it one day. But of course I didn't know what. And at the time also, my mom was very keen that we had books on poverty, and we got a lot of various books, whatever was available. She can say more because she works on books on poverty for her PhD dissertation, but just to say it's not that great in the French language. There is not that much. One of the thing I had is in a magazine. There was a left-wing Catholic magazine. There was a discussion about Mother Teresa, a comic book about Mother Teresa and her work. And among other things, it said that in Calcutta, people live on there are so many people in Calcutta that they only have 1 square meter each to sleep. And I imagine the grid of Calcutta like this, exactly square, and except square of 1 meter by 1 meter. And I was wondering, how do they sleep? They have to curl like this. And I thought this was really terrible. Until someone told me that 1 square meter can also be a rectangle of 50 centimeters by 2 meters, which is of course much better, but still not perfect. So this is kind of what I had in my mind. And of course, when I first landed in India, many years later, at about 22, I arrived and I saw a city with a lot of people going about their business and a lot of things happening, and not people sleeping like that one by one next to this. So I think this story is important because it illustrates 2 things. One is the power of books, because the books that kids read really stay with them. And this image, for example, is still with me, like many years later, and influence what they decide to become. And the second is that this book was pretty bad. I mean, it was really that, when you think of it, it's pretty terrible, full of stereotypes and representation. And it was important to have better books. So I kind of, as soon as I got... so first, I really wanted to write for children so that they have good books on the topic.
I wanted to ask you, of course, the story is what it is, and, it is engaging, but how do you sort of make a story about... So I have 8-year-olds, almost, okay, twin boys. I try very hard to get them to read. Unfortunately, so they read. I don't censor what they read. They're reading David, this thing called Captain Underpants and stuff like that, which, Dogman, okay? So there's
Dogman is a good book.
Dogman is a good book?
Dogman is great.
It is?
Dogman is fantastic.
Okay.
The drawing you can like or not like, but the values that are in Dogman, they are very deep.
Perfect. So, I had a friend who sort of had this. So we went to a bookstore, and, I'm sorry for taking over the thing. We went to a bookstore, children's bookstore in Delhi, and her children, 2 girls, and I have always this thing, girls versus boy? Can you sort of jig them into, empathy? Girls are more, have empathy in them. I don't know if boys are wired differently. I tried desperately to sort of make them different, but they go for cars. Tried very hard to break that stereotype. Doesn't happen. And we went to Dogman, and her children were picking up classics, and my kids were going to Dogman, and she was like, "Do they read this?" And I was like, "Read this thing." So which is why this thing. But the question I was asking in terms of even illustration, when you look at a book, Poor Economics for Kids, you're sort of looking at creating an illustration for poor people and poverty, right? But the illustrations that you have in this book are also breaking stereotypes. You're sort of breaking the idea of what poor people look like, of what neighborhood shops look like, of what villages look like, of urban settings look like. So can you really talk a little bit about creating this world which is could be specifically Indian, but also universal, and the kind of dilemmas that you faced while doing that?
So I guess what I realized illustrating this series is that we also have visual stereotypes about poverty. As I was saying, part of my PhD thesis is to record how we worked on this series, what are the micro choices that we made, what kind of characters that we wanted to build, what kind of stories, what kind of environment the stories are in. And the other part of the PhD is to look at what is available for French kids on poverty. And a lot of it is, for example, you can translate poverty into visual terms. You can translate it into largely gray tones. The characters, for example, will look weak, will look lifeless. You'll also see that there is not much color, that the environments are dirty. And we had questions from French kids saying, aren't the poor all dirty, for example? And I think this kind of representation just reinforces this view. So I think my visual style was already very colorful, was already very lively. I can't just draw in a very miserabilistic way. So I guess that's why Esther also figured that this was a good visual to translate the positive tone that she wanted to bring to the books. But then she had also a very key requirement, which was that the book shouldn't be set in a particular country, because that's also something that you see in children's picture book about poverty in France, is that they are very much located. So it's going to be the story of Raj in India, and you can very much think that all Indians are poor. By reading those books, you can very much come to this conclusion as a kid. And she wanted to dissociate the association between specific countries, specific cultures, specific ethnicities, and poverty. So as an illustrator, it's a huge issue, because you still want to build a whole world full of details that children want to enter. So I guess the fact that it's all it's not abstract, but it's very stylized, that the skin color are not realistic, that it's all happening. The way I thought about
It's the air conditioning coming on.
Okay. The way I thought about it is that I read Poor Economics, and I thought that I could take visual principles from the visual world of economics. And for example, you see that the whole book is set on a line. And that line very much comes from the S and L curves that are at the beginning of the book, and that's it when you go, you stay in poverty or you get out of poverty. And I thought that was a visual link with the research that Esther is doing, or the fact that it's geometric echoes the diagrams that you'll see. So this is why, in a sense, it's located in a world of economics.
Yeah. I wanted to talk really about some concepts that the book has. It's about 10 stories, 10 different economic sort of circumstances and the lives of people. So it starts off in Neelu, this girl who wants to who goes to school but then has a hard time sort of adjusting to school, and you have the teacher, you have her parents, you have and then till the end, when it ends with Neelu again in this, where she wants to become a truck driver, and part of it is also breaking gender stereotypes, right? But what I found incredibly wonderful about the book is, and I would like you to talk about the fact that, there is some things that that you put in, like, for example, how do you make the aspect of Neelu having some agency herself? We talked about that, about the fact that she has some agency, but the teacher who is sort of teaching her by rote almost, how does she also not seem evil? Can you talk about that kind of nuance that you put into the book, where each character had an inner world? And how does that, why that deliberate decision, and how did that get translated in a children's book?
So I think so first of all, I would say you talked about economic situation. I think we can take away strike economic. It's not about economics, it's about life.
Yeah.
It's about, the type of situation you encounter, or the kids like this would encounter in their life. So I think you can, hopefully, no economics required. And then in a sense, you're not learning economics with a big E, but something about how people live their lives.
Empathy.
And just, if you read this book, you will find out how people live their life, the type of things they encounter. This is really more about that.
Yeah.
And hopefully will generate some empathy. So the huge luxury we had, and in my complete naivete about the world of publishing, I had no idea it was a luxury till a little later, is that we worked on these 10 books. In the French edition, these are 10 separate books. In all of the Indian languages, there are also 10, now 5, and then another 5 later, separate books. And in the English edition, it's one big book with 10 chapters, but to be read separately, we imagine. So that really gives us a lot of time. So each book is centered around one character, but they're all friends, and so you see them, appearing. There are about 50 characters in the book in total, and you see them appearing from book to book. Neelu is there pretty much in every book, but everyone is there a lot. The astute reader, of which kids tend to be, will know who is whose friends, cousins, and so on. And that really, and in the interstice of each of the book, we also know what's happening to them, what they're thinking, etc. They are very full people to us. And hopefully they'll also be very full people, maybe slightly different to the reader as they feel in what's happening to them. Very much like in many kids' magazine, you have one kind of continued series about the adventure of so and so. From book to book, you see them through their various tribulations of their lives. So that's a key way. Another key way is to taking our, and it's related to the series idea, is to taking our time through the story. So there are some images which do not contribute greatly to the movement of the plot. And do not introduce a spectacular new economic concept either. But something's happening. They're having tea. They're in the bus. Something like that. So there is a bit of breathing room there. And the third one that Jen can talk more about is that characters are given full page, where we see what they think.
And I guess that's a little bit an adaptation of the first Poor Economics, where regularly in the chapters they let someone speak out of real interviews that Esther and Abhijit did, and we wanted to reproduce that sense. At some point, we stop in the rush of the story, and we just let each character speak. Sometimes it's just a thought to themselves, a commentary on the situation. Sometimes it's an open explanation. Sometimes it's a guess. We just wanted to give those contradictory views so that the kids also can take them. That they are not just exposed to to the story we want to tell them, or I guess the solution we want them to come at.
You've also done workshops, and I think, can you talk a little bit about the interaction that you had with children, whether it was Esther's, where she says that during COVID, your daughter would have these very important meetings with all the staff, this thing, as well as sort of the kind of workshops you've had with children to talk really about how, whether they understand it. The point is that while, children in a certain environment and together, if they're single, would have the ability to understand more. I mean, because, for example, your kids absorb economic concepts much easier possibly, or, are prone to understand this thing. But maybe a kid who doesn't, this thing, how does that work? Can you talk a little bit about the kind of workshops you've had and the kind of responses that you've had in terms of that?
So I think we wanted the story to have many layers for different ages also, and we could see that different kids of different ages understood the stories in a different way. Some were just finding the characters very playful, like the environment, the fact that they would change sceneries, that you would get to know all the scenes in the village, and that was just that. And in some sense, it was fully fine because we first wanted them to like the characters and gradually get more interested about what was happening to them. Much older kids, I've actually had workshops with kids which were not I guess the intended readers. I also had workshops with migrant kids. So there, what I try to do, since I'm conducting the workshops most of the time, I try to make them think a little bit about the topic, but mostly it's also about the representation. How would you draw that scene, or how would you draw that story? So, for example, I did workshops on the relation between the village and the city, and I asked the kids, whenever you go to a new city, what do you see? Are you afraid? Who do you meet first? Things like that. So I try to bring them into the very basic experience that the characters have in the book and that they can relate to, because a lot of the time it's kids who don't experience poverty themselves, and I think I try to bring them into this very basic aspect of life, which is not, as Esther said, has not that big economics word in it. And I think one thing that a kid told you is we intended the series to be for French kids who may see poverty in the streets of Paris, but it's not the kind of poverty that we talk about in this book. And we were very happy to see the response of some kids, especially in a workshop in Delhi, in a library. And a kid said that, how can kids in France understand the life in this book? So we felt very grateful that she thought this environment was hers, and that she took it for her. I think she said that.
Yeah. So we had a workshop in a library in Delhi with Pratham Books, and so some kids were drawing, and of course, and so this is again, there's nothing to understand. We are not trying to explain. I think that's the key with this book, is that although in the English version there are explanations at the end, but they are more like put into concepts. But in principle, there's nothing to explain. It's a story. Like, you like the story, you don't like the story. Hopefully, you understand what's happening in the story. And in the creative process, there was a lot of effort to make the story good stories in and of themselves. And sometimes I was tempted as an author of taking some digression, because I thought I could bring up some other things that I might want to talk about. For example, there is a story about an entrepreneur. It's the only book that has 2 title characters, and they go into this. One of the older ones, she's a late teen. She gets a microcredit loan, and she has some. I mean, she tried different venture. It doesn't really work, and then she. Eventually, in fact, she'll never do a job. She ends up working for an organization that could be Pratham, for example.
Yes, that's what I also thought. Yeah,
it could be Pratham, working on helping them doing their digital program. Anyways, in this story, there is the other character who is a little kid who works in his father's shop, and at some point, I wanted them to try other businesses, because I thought it would be a good vehicle to see the various kind of business people might try, and and that became, as a story, that became too involved and hard to follow. So our French publisher, Céline Ottenwalter, and Cheyenne convinced me that we had to kind of
cut that.
Kill
your darlings, as my editor used to say. So,
but on the other hand, the fact we worked very closely, so there are many different details in the images that are directly inspired or taken from a study, because I kept referring to Esther saying, this is the scene that I need to represent, so you can send me the paper that corresponds to that, or please send me references to this specific electric pump that I need to represent, because I want that to be accurate, or things like that. So there are many things, and the kids are much more mindful about the images, so you can put so much more meaning into the images, and this allows you to put less text, less explanation, because there are so many things that they'll pick up. If the color is the same in page 3 and page 15, they'll just pick it up. So you can very much rely on them for making this kind of connection.
So,
and it's very important that everything is true, even though it's fiction. It's all true.
Yeah, I was going to ask that, because what I found fascinating was, and I think we talked about the idea of Star Trek names. You said the names are such that they could be anywhere, but they're not specifically Indian, except to maybe Nilu, where they see. But there is an aspect of what is possible, even if it isn't a happy ending. I mean, it isn't a fairy tale ending. Let's say there's a healthy dose of reality in it. And for example, there's one story about this child whose father has a boat, and then a cyclone comes and the boat gets destroyed, and they go back to the insurance firm, and the insurance firm refuses to pay, and then they sort of write a letter to say, but this is unfair. And I think you guys had a different ending in mind. And can you talk a little bit about that? The fact that you had that ending, and as well as the ending that you tailored for the election one. Yeah. Do you talk a little bit about that?
So it's almost the opposite to me having to remove some aspect of the story. Here we enrich the story, because the original story that I had proposed was with the insurance was they complained to the insurer, so insurers refused to reimburse them. They complain, they write a letter to the newspaper, and that makes the insurer cave in, and he reimburses them. And there it's actually Abhijit who read this version and said that doesn't ring true, because that wouldn't happen like that. If it's not insured, it's not insured. Like, tough luck. So in fact, what would happen is that the government steps in as the insurer of last resort when there is some disaster like that, some cyclone that took the boat and the house, and so that's what we decided to write. And that, for a children's books, you might think it's funny. They will sort of reintroduce a new actor at the end, and that to the government, which has some abstraction. But then it ensures that the story is true. So there is a happy ending, anyways, which is good. But it's a true, it's a true happy ending.
It's not a Disney ending.
It's not a Disney ending.
I guess for the election book, we had the same issue, which was it's a book on women and elections. And in this book, there are new elections in the village, and the previous mayor was a woman, and she doesn't want to run again. And it's the story about how her husband now wants to run and make pressure, etc. And the first ending was of Nilu's mom, so the main character's mom, winning the election. And the last page that we proposed in the first place was just a scene of her victory. Everyone is happy, they celebrate. And we read it again. Actually, we were in a pretty final stage of the story. We read it again, and we felt that this was a bit too much like what the main guy would have done. And we felt it was too much focusing on the individual, and it did not felt right. So we removed this scene, and we added another scene where we show the villagers discussing together who they would like, not so much who they would like to see, rather than what are the kind of programs that they would like to see, what are the kinds of policies that they would like, and more the collective discussion. And we felt that this was maybe less spectacular. And that's something that you can very much be tempted to do, which is always to bring the spectacular, the heroic. But it was more, I guess it was more fair.
Yeah.
To end on that.
So, also, and I think I wanted to talk about the aspect of leaving these stories open. I'm not open-ended, but allowing conversation. And I think you've at the last session, there was this lady who stood up and said that she reads these stories to her daughter, and it sort of brings up questions of fairness and equality, and how do you sort of then navigate that world? And this book actually allows you to have those conversations. So can you really talk about that? And I think at some point of time, children chose different endings to different books. There were some workshops where they kind of wanted to tweak a little bit or wanted to add something. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So that, I think in workshops, or a lot of the time, the teachers ask them to draw, to mimic my drawings, I guess. And but in the process of mimicking, they come up with wildly different stories. I don't think, usually it's quite, doing workshops with kids, it's a very intense process. So a lot of the time they want to show what they drew out of your book, they want to show what they draw on the side, and you end up, so I don't think I've read that many. But I think in the process, we very much use the characters to discuss and to have actually sometimes, not contradictions, but real discussions among ourselves. Like, for example, for this election and women case, given children's picture book today, which very much talk about feminism and strong women character, it felt a bit, at least for me, I think it felt odd in the beginning to show that former mayor who doesn't want to run again, and she says why. She says that she doesn't want to embarrass her husband and things like that. And I felt embarrassed by doing that, because I feel like today, as a young author of children's literature, I should bring very vivacious female characters, strong female characters, and then discussing with, and that we discussed with Esther and the publisher, and Esther said, well, this is how it happens in the studies. The first, well, she can talk about it, but I'll do the first round of women who do this this program of being in elections where only women can run are a bit, don't want to do it after that, and she said it would be more true, but then we can use another character, another female character, who then picks it up and runs again. And the fact that we have so many characters allow for basically placing different values on different characters.
Yeah, I think this attempt to not have black and white, in fact, that's full of colors. The stories are not black and white. The illustrations are not black and white either. It's not just because I think it's good to, convey the subtlety of life. I also think it's good literature. And I think kids' books are better when they have that amount of, how would I say, fluidity to them. So one of the French children author I really like is called Emmanuel Guibert. And he has this series on a little donkey. And it's kind of related in a remote way, because it's a little donkey and his friends at schools. So instead of being people of different colors, they are different animals, but they live like humans. Anyways, he's talking very much about everyday life, not poverty. But one of the things that I really always admire about his stories is that they kind of don't really end, and they don't have like closure. And they certainly don't have closure where the good guy and the bad guy, Ariel is kind of the main character, but he has a lot of, he has good aspects, bad aspects, and his best friend has issues in school, but in some other ways is really a great kid, and so on and so forth. So nobody is reduced to a flat to a flat person. And I just think it's good practice for kids' literature, and too many I read a lot to my kids. I've read a lot to my kids. I've read fantastic books to my kids, But the moment you get into trying to explain things, nonfiction, it tends to get so simple, and it's just the life is like flattened in a way that kids are not stupid; they see it. And then but you do have, of course, exceptions to that, and those are the kids. I've seen my kids when they were little coming back and back and back to those books that had this richness and openness to them. So this is really about trying to write good books, not so much about writing, conveying the difficulty of economic concept or whatever. It's just, good books with the feature of, the feature of life. So, for example, this woman who doesn't want to run again, she explains how if she ran again, everybody would make fun of her husband.
Yeah.
And she says that without resentment, I think, in the way, or
in a matter-of-fact way.
She said that in a matter-of-fact way, this is how the world is, and it's okay. It is how the world is. I mean, it's not okay in a way. Of course, he should be okay, but he should be fine with her doing it. But it's how the world is, and it's not the end of the world, because there is another solution, which is very much what happens in reality, which is we see that when there are reservations for women, a next generation of female is empowered, and that's what we represent in the book. But just from the point of view of literature, that character, she's strong, because she's telling the kid, no, I'm not going to do that, and this is why, but this is what we're going to do instead.
You talked about different, the reservation that somehow your French publisher had. The book is. The stories are the same, but they've been tweaked in various ways. So, for example, the French edition, you said, has, this essay for parents to be able to have these tough conversations. And the Indian book has this version of it, has some sort of, little thing for kids to understand it. Can you talk really about how the same story works in different formats? What do you add in terms of this thing, and how does that work? How does this thing, and have you made any sort of changes in terms of the editions that come out in Indian languages?
So I guess the question of accessibility, making those books accessible, was very much always there. I guess both in terms of visual in terms of book, we made so that the stories can be read individually, but that you can also read them as a series. And I think we are very happy that there are so many versions, because each editor chose a different approach. I guess the French publisher was a bit afraid that French parents would be afraid of the topic, and a lot of the time they are, because I go on festivals with the book and I can see that they go towards the book because the book don't look like books on poverty, so they go towards them. It's a playful looking book with a lot of color, and then whenever I tell them that it's a book on poverty, I can see them backing off, and then I go back to tell them that it's not on poverty. It's broken down into this is environment. And so whenever they hear, for example, it's on the environment or it's on women empowering, just the fact that it's labeled differently makes them change their mind, because a book on poverty in general is just too big of a word. They feel like they don't have the clue to tell that to their kids, which is often what they do whenever, I don't know, they walk and they see homeless people in Paris. They are just embarrassed, and they feel that's what they tell me. So I guess the French publisher was trying to avoid that by reassuring them in having this 4 pages, which basically tells them in a very serious tone what is the research behind that, so that they have the keys for having this conversation with the kids. And the Chiki Sarkar, the publisher of the book in English in India, felt that they should be directed to the kids themselves. So they have essays that are meant for slightly older kids who read by themselves. So there Esther addresses them directly, is trying to bring a little bit more of herself also into this question and make it, really trying to make them think about that. And they are, in the Pratham books version, they are used as reading books with no explanation whatsoever, because they are really focused on the story and how the kids can enjoy reading by reading those stories. So we are very happy that there are so many different versions. I guess it tells something about how publishers view their readership. I think bouncing on something that we said about the openness, I think this is a very French approach to children's literature. And we had comments from American publishers saying that they are too complex and too sophisticated for their readership. So,
so there are no changes across editions in the stories themselves, or even in the names of the character. Just the essays, the physical presentation, and the title. So in French, there is no title. We call it the Nilou series, but it doesn't have a title for each book has a title, but the series doesn't have a title. In English, it's called Poor Economics for Kids by reference to Poor Economics. And in other Indian languages, in the Pratham edition, it's called Fundamental Rights. The series is called Fundamental Rights. So it's addressed to the kids. This is about your fundamental rights. One reason why there are no changes is because from the very beginning we, and when I say we, it's mainly the work of the French editor and Cheyenne, conceived about the technical aspect of the book in a way that they could be made into this, in French there are nice books, hardbacks, each of them is hardbacks, the paper is beautiful paper, and so on. But you could go from that to publish them as in the Indian language edition, 100 rupees a book, and they are just as beautiful. And Cheyenne draws with color pencil. That's her. So the first versions we did was color pencil. And the editor was like, if we do color pencil, if we try to do a cheaper edition, it's going to look horrible. Because it's going to be a photo of color pencil. It's not going to look good. So they really had to come up with a process that uses only the 4 primary colors, such that it can be printed anywhere. And so this richness in colors, etc., it's coming with a process that can be done without loss in translation into any very standard process. And that was very important. So this had to be built from the get-go. And I want to give a lot of credit to Cheyenne there because she had to change the entire way that she drew them, and she can talk a bit about the process because it's a very it's a funky, involved process, very interesting that had to be developed for this. But it's not because you write for poor children or you want to be that you have to write poor books. This is meant to be a rich books for poor children.
So it's about. I think the sheer pleasure that you have as a kid to look at beautiful illustrations that really have a grain, that have beautiful, vivacious colors. I think that's something that we really didn't want to lose. I won't go into details because it's a boring printing details, but a lot of the time, if you want to have very good colors, you have to add. If you don't want to lose this density, you have to add another Pantone or something like that. And that's something that a lot of time annoys me in France because those are books that I can't even buy myself because if I had to buy them, I would just go broke. So I'm a bit sad to find such good looking picture books for kids, but I can't buy myself. So I can't even imagine having kids and trying to buy them beautiful books that are too expensive. So we really had that in mind, and we felt that the pleasure of looking at them is also a huge pleasure for young kids.
So the process really involves only the 4 colors. And you have a lot of colors, but it's only based on these 4 colors, and that took a lot of work.
So there are concepts like, for example, the government, right? Or the schemes that you explain. Can you talk a little bit about that? About whether when you sort of have to make it representative across countries, how do you sort of do that, and the kind of process and collaboration that you had to do that?
Yeah. So the kids' books tend to have characters that are well known. Although the construction worker, kids like construction sites, cars, they are in our book. The the mom, the dad, the truck driver, the witch, children, school teacher, and so on. So in some cases we have to subvert the person. So for example, the witch in our person, the witch in our book, Bibi and the Witch, turns out to be an old woman who is no witch at all, and they discover the humanity of this person. So you go from their being scared of this witch to realizing that it's a person who went through a difficult life, and despite that can actually bounce back with enough help. And then, so we have such character where we subvert, and then we have people that you rarely see in kids' books, such as an insurance agent or the people from the government, and that was a big issue. We didn't even know how, or the person, the microcredit lender. We didn't know how to call them. We didn't know how to represent them, etc. So Shane can say a bit more, but I'll just repeat what I said earlier today, which is just on the graphic representation of the government worker. The first thing I said, I was like, he's going to be really round. And Shane and Celine were like, that looks like a prejudice. Maybe not all government workers are round, which is quite true. They are not all round at all. So finally, they are not round.
I can see that, so understand whenever I have the books in front of me and the kids, they roam around and they look at it, and I tell them the titles of the book, and I can see that whenever I say that the title is Bibi and the Witch, they recognize the witch as being a stock character belonging to children's literature that they will relate to, and the parents as well. So they anchor. So a lot of them choose that story precisely because they can recognize the characters. But sometimes we had to, I guess, involve more boring characters, like not even the head person of the department, but a middle person who just comes in and check on the old woman to see if she had, I don't know, if she was helped or something like that. And I think that's a bit resisting the perpetual action in children's picture books. Sometimes we wanted to bring action. The kids go on a trip and they go ask the villager about something, but sometimes we really resisted saying, there we really have to put a boring page because they have to understand that this is part of the process, that all of those sub worker are a key part of the chain, and if they don't have representation in the books, they'll never think of those workers as being essential in fighting poverty.
Yeah, that's fabulous. Now, I know we have about 6 minutes, and I think we have questions. We do, okay? So, lady first, and then the two gentlemen. Sorry, bias there.
Thank you so much. Hi, first of all, thank you so much for this wonderful session. And I wanted to ask that when we write a children's book, we just as we do it in literature, good literature invokes conversations. That applies same on the children's literature. Do you have a moment of self-resistance while writing such stories, because there are the parents of privileged class who have the agency to select stories for their children that what they should read, and to avoid such questions, they don't want to pick such stories for their children. Do you have that moment of self-resistance? Or do you want to bring that conviction for those parents instead of children?
Well, I think the hope is that if you write good books, then people will, and draw good books, then people will buy them. Both as long as it's accessible, poor children, and also the parents of richer children. But this goes back to the discussion we were having before, which is in India, in poor neighborhood villages, etc., they don't need mediation to understand what this is about, because that's about their fundamental rights, as the series is called. And in France, they needed the most mediation, so we give it to them. Enough material that they feel they can be comfortable with the stories.
Just to build on that, from what I see on the thesis, what matters is also the variety of books that are available, because it's not about one book that solves all the answers. It's about the fact that the parents also have in the literary productions, they have the choice. And what I see is that a lot of times the authors or the illustrators, wherever they come from, pick the poverty that they can see. So if they are from Paris, if they are from Belgium, if they are from London, they'll talk about homelessness because this is the poverty that they know. And a lot of the time, this is a topic that they feel they can approach because they see it in their everyday life, and they feel that their reader is going to see it in their everyday life. In the corpus, I have books from India that are made by Indian authors and illustrators, books from Brazil that are made by Brazilian authors, illustrators, books that are set in Congo, and they also talk about the poverty that they can see. So I guess it's about the general variety over this topic and the fact that the publishers and the authors feel like this is a topic that they want to take on, and the more people take this topic on, the more diverse view you can have also on this topic.
Maybe one more word. Why I told you that Dogman was a great book. Why I think Dogman is a great book is that it actually does, it touches very deep topics about friendship, about not being bad or good, about taking care of other people, about misunderstanding others and so on. But it's deep enough that parents don't know, and they innocently buy this for their children, and then the value gets. So I think this is why I think those are actually fantastic books, although very different.
Okay, gentleman here. Gentleman here, and then there's one other gentleman there. Both the gentlemen.
Yeah.
Can we take both the questions together? Yeah, I was just going to take that.
Given that this is a children's book, I suppose it's a question for both. When you're putting pen to paper, when you're writing it, when you're first writing, is there any, of course, you're probably making it easier for comprehension for the children, but is there any attribute you're sensitive to because you're writing for children when you're writing it?
And the other gentleman at the back?
Yes, so my question is also quite similar in the sense that when you write a book, is it just when you say writing for children, is it that the protagonist is a child and it's just a good book, right? Because a good book resonates with everyone, right? So I also read a lot of children's books because I love them, right? So I'm just trying to understand, is this a specific kind of book that the children's book, or is it just a good book with a child as a protagonist?
So there is a lot that is specific when you write for children. So here the format, so each book has the same format, it's 32 pages. So when you write for adults, you can write infinite number of pages. So that's a big difference. It doesn't have too many words. That's another big difference, so you really need concision. A lot is said via the image, that's the third difference. The protagonists are children, although there are also many adults. That's a fourth difference, although you can have adult books on children as well. And then to come back to this, yes, there are some things you will not say. So first of all, a book for kids has to end well. So all of our books end well, even though there is this opening. And we don't take tragic stories, we don't tell tragic stories. And second, as it happens, maybe Shane, you can give the example of the parents beating the kids.
Yes. But I think on this, for example, I don't like to read for myself as an adult stories that don't end well. So I think it's just the same standard for my own reading. But there are many questions about violence or about the characters being very sick towards death. So there were many instances in the book where we had this discussion about what should we represent. And for example, in the first book, there is this scene where the kids are beaten up by. It's not in the book, but in reality, in the study, what Esther told me is that the parents start to beat up the kids, and then they start to beat up the teacher. Should we represent that? In some sense, we don't want to paint over the reality, but on the other hand, we really want to serve the story, and there we felt that maybe this would have been more true to the reality, but on the other hand, the kids would have been so shocked by this scene that they would have forgotten about the main plot and what we actually wanted to tell them. Or for example, in another part on the election book, the main big man comes to the woman and he menaces her. And there I felt that I could show him on the verge of being violent, but not showing anything. Or sometimes the old person that actually the publisher asked me to make her look less scary or with more teeth. But I refused because I felt that I should not beautify all the characters for the sake of the children. So those are micro choices, but that actually matter in maintaining this this balance between covering up everything and showing the reality.
Thank you.